Hey, y'all. Welcome to episode 37 of the Growing Space podcast. In this week's episode, I am going to talk about the notorious bugs of summer. So I am going to touch on a handful of the notorious bugs of summer. I'm going to introduce them to you all. These are bugs that I see almost every year, that my clients see almost every year, every summer. So we will be focusing mainly on summer pests and summer bugs in particular. I'm going to describe them to you, and I'm going to teach you some ways to help limit or mitigate the amount of damage that they do on your beloved summer crops. And I also have a few surprises and treats for you tucked into this week's episode. So it's a great episode to tune into, y'all. Nice choice. If you are brand new to listening to this podcast, then let me just go ahead and share that I am located in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are in the USDA Hardiness Zone 8A, which means that generally throughout the year, we have fairly mild temperatures. And in the summertime, we are blessed with hot, humid, summery days. For those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, we are getting ready to celebrate the official start of summer. So June welcomes a brand new season. We say goodbye to spring and hello to summer. And we also say hello to a lot of our summer bugs this month. So I felt like this was super timely to kick off the month of June with an episode all about bugs. We have a lot of ground to cover today. So thanks for tuning in, and let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Growing Space podcast. I'm your host, Farmer Erin, owner of the Patio Farmer, and I believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. Tune in every Tuesday as I share my best tips, tricks, and encouragement for tending to homegrown edible plants. I'm here to support your food growing journey. The Growing Space podcast is sponsored by Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. Plant Club by the Patio Farmer is a monthly subscription service I started in 2020. It's a membership-based opportunity to take your growing journey to the next level. With 4 different membership options, you get to decide the amount and kind of support that's right for you. All Plant Club members receive access to my online community through a platform called Circle. Having access to this platform allows members to share pictures, ask questions, celebrate harvests, and get to know each other. All Plant Club members also have access to free seeds each month, along with information on how to plant and tend to their crops, with seeding instructions and downloadable resources from the Patio Farmer's Resource Library. Membership starts at just $14 a month. Join Plant Club today by visiting my website, thepatiofarmer.com/membership. Two things to call out at the top of the show today, you guys. One is I have shared in today's show notes a link for you to purchase the Patio Farmer's Big Book of Bugs. This is a digital resource, a digital downloadable resource that I created last summer. The Patio Farmer's Big Book of Bugs is a 15-page downloadable digital resource that I have created just for you, just for my clients, my customers, and my podcast listeners. But tucked into this resource are pictures of some of the most common bugs that you will see in your growing space throughout the year. So there's a lot of summer bugs, the bugs that we're going to be discussing today found in this guide, but it will walk you through by plant family. So there's the Cucurbitaceae plants, there is the Solanaceae plants, the Fabaceae plants, the Brassicaceae plants, the Rosaceae, which I haven't done an episode on the Rosaceae plants yet, and then some other like general or multi-family pests, as well as a whole section on the good bugs. We have the carnivores, we have our pollinators, the decomposers, and lots of plenty of good bugs tucked into the Patio Farmer's Big Book of Bugs, as well as some tips for keeping the bad bugs out of your space and the good bugs in your space, and a list of some of my favorite bug defense, all natural bug defense techniques, products, supplies to keep on hand. Take a peek at the show notes and find the link to purchase the Big Book of Bugs. I will go ahead and share with you that it's only $14. You can grab this digital resource for only $14. That's less than $1 a page, and I think it's totally worth it. So be sure to check the show notes. And then the second thing that I would like to share with you all is I am starting to put together some episodes for a new mini series, and this one is going to feature interviews with some of my clients and customers. I know, I'm really excited. So I have 2 conversations already lined up and working on recording these in the next couple weeks. If you are listening to this podcast and you're like, ooh, I think it would be fun to sit down with Farmer Erin and maybe share some of my experience, what I've learned by growing food, what my growing space looks like at home, or things that you've learned, celebrations from your growing space with others. I think it would make for I'm really excited about this mini series. I think it's going to be super relatable and super fun to just hear about what other people are doing in their growing spaces and the things that they're learning about their plants and themselves and their communities, their families, and just life in general. So if you would be interested in being interviewed as a guest on this podcast, that I would love to hear from you. So if you are interested, please shoot me an email. My email, I'll put this in the show notes, but my email is just thepatiofarmer@gmail.com. So shoot me an email and let me know that you are interested in being a guest. Okay, so in today's episode, like I mentioned, we are doing the notorious bugs, the ones that are most challenging, the ones that I always get asked about, and the ones that are just relentless in our growing spaces. Okay, so here they are. These are the ones we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about the squash bug. We're also going to talk about the vine borer. We're going to talk about the tomato hornworm. We must talk about the tomato hornworm. And then we're going to talk about Japanese beetles and leaf-footed bugs. Okay? So those are the bad bugs, the notorious bugs that we're going to cover in today's episode. The squash bug, the vine borer, the hornworm, the Japanese beetle, and the leaf-footed bug. Those 5 notorious bugs is what we're going to spend today's episode discussing. As I talk about each one of these notorious bugs, each one of these 5 notorious bugs of summer, I'm going to give you some ways that you can identify if you have this pest in your growing space. I'll give you some different recommendations on how to keep their populations under control, and I will share with you some interesting facts, shall we say, of each of these notorious bugs that are just good to keep in mind and good to know about them as you encounter them in your space. These are bugs that I just about expect to encounter every year. I will also share that, as we are tending to plants and taking care of plants, we are also fostering an ecosystem, a community of all different kinds of organisms that relate to our plants. And some of them are better for our plants than others. But anytime you are tending to plants, you are cultivating an ecosystem. We humans are part of that ecosystem. Bugs are part of that ecosystem. And so it really is just about finding a happy coexistence between all members of the ecosystem. So just keep that framing in mind as well as we go through today's episode. So jumping in, we're going to talk about the squash bug. Now, the squash bug is the first of the notorious summer bugs. This is also one of the bugs that I see emerging first. One of the earliest pests, one of the earliest bugs to emerge in the late spring and early summer. Squash bugs are kind of a grayish brown shield bug. Squash bugs are true bugs. That's an actual classification of insect. They look very similar to stink bugs. So if you can think of a stink bug and picture that in your head, a grayish brown, large, true bug with a flat exoskeleton, a flat back that looks kind of like a shield. What the squash bug loves to feed on is the leaves of the squash. So this is where you will find the squash bug. Squash bugs do fly, so keep that in mind. They also like to lay eggs on our squash plants. And when they lay eggs, they are clusters of teeny tiny, usually bright yellow eggs. You'll usually find them, like I said, in clusters, usually like linear clusters on squash leaves. An important fact to know about the squash bug is that part of the squash bug's life cycle is in the soil and overwinters. So squash bugs are overwintering pests. A lot of our pests do overwinter close to wherever the plants were that they feasted on during the season. This is an important thing to keep in mind as you are tending to your plants and as you are planning for your growing space each year. So squash bugs, they're nymphs or part of their life cycle, a phase of their life cycle, overwinters in the soil. As the temperatures are cooling in the fall, those baby nymphs will be in the soil or in the leaves. They'll be close to the soil, and that is where they hang out all winter until they are mature and then will emerge in the spring or summer, which is when we usually see the squash bugs. Then they lay their eggs, the eggs hatch, the nymphs mature, and then the nymphs will overwinter in the soil, and that is how their life cycle perpetuates. Because you know that squash bugs like to overwinter, one way of treating or helping to reduce the amount or the population of squash bugs in your space is to skip a year. I know this is a challenging one. Okay. So I'm not saying this lightly because I know that people love squash, they love growing squash, and squash is a great like summer crop. So I can understand how this can be a little hard to take in. But one of the great ways to help reduce populations of squash bugs and other overwintering pests, which there's a lot of overwintering pests tucked into this episode. In fact, most of them are overwintering, if not all of them. So one thing that you can try doing is rotating your crops or skipping planting the crop that they particularly like for a year and see if you can knock back those populations. We'll take that for what you will. I'll be sharing some more general ways of mitigating pest issues later on towards the end of the episode. But just keep in mind for any of these overwintering pests, that is always an option for you. So speaking of squash and speaking of overwintered pests, another one of the notorious bugs of summer is the squash vine borer. And I know that this is triggering for some people because of how startling or how kind of disturbing this little bug can be when you encounter it for the first time. The most drastic encounter that we have with a vine borer is not with the adult phase of this bug. It's actually with the larval stage of this bug. So the adult vine borer is actually a moth, and she's black and she's orange and she flies around. She does like squash. That's her favorite plant, summer squash in particular. And what the adult does is she digs a little hole. Yeah, digs a little hole right at the base of your squash plant. This kind of happens kind of early on in the squash season. If you planted your squash in April or early May, then you could expect to see the vine borer start to pop up towards mid-May or early June, hence the timing of this episode. But usually you'll see the moth show up first. I actually saw my first vine borer moth last week while I was making making my rounds with some clients. And so that was one of the impetuses for this episode. But I saw a moth hopping around and I quickly tried applying some preventative products, which I'll talk about later on. Basically, what this moth does is she digs a little hole right at the base of the squash plant. And then she lays her eggs inside the squash, inside the vines of the squash. And then when the eggs are mature, they hatch and the larvae start to grow inside. They grow inside the squash plant. I know, it's crazy. And then once they're mature enough, the little larvae, which are actually like a creamy white grub. Yeah, like I said, this is definitely a notorious bug. This is definitely one that, sticks with people and can be very triggering. This vine borer will eat its way out of your squash plant. So the telltale sign that you have a vine borer issue to manage in your space is that one day you'll go out and you'll see your summer squash and everybody looks nice and happy and healthy. And then the next day you come out and everybody is wilted, just flat on the ground. If you look right at the base of the stalk, you'll see kind of like a sawdust at the very base, which is where the vine borer has bored its way out of the vine and has just wreaked a bit of havoc on your squash plants. This is the notorious part, right? But usually by the time the larva has emerged from the inside of the squash vine, it is too late to save that plant. Like I said, there is a great way that you can prevent vine borers from impacting your plants. So the way that you can do this is applying diatomaceous earth at the base of your squash plants. Diatomaceous earth, for those of you who are not familiar with this product, when it's all natural, this is safe for organic growing, and it's a white, powdery, almost like a talc or like a baby powder product that you can use and apply to any parts of your plant. I will share that this is a broad spectrum insecticidal product. This does not target just one insect or one pest. This will target any insect that happens to land on your plants where the diatomaceous earth is. So it will also affect your good bugs, like your pollinators, like your bees or your ladybugs or your praying mantises. We kind of don't want to impact those bugs, those insects in a negative way. Right? So you just want to be very cautious about where you apply this product, but it's called diatomaceous earth. And I will put a link to an example of the product in today's show notes, but it's more commonly referred to as DE, and it's safe for humans to interact with your hands. You don't have to wear gloves. You certainly can. It's also safe for pets, and it's safe for organic growing. So the plants don't actually absorb the diatomaceous earth. It is simply a topical powder that you can apply to the plant itself or the soil, and it basically acts as a desiccant. As bugs are crawling along the diatomaceous earth, it dries out their exoskeletons. And diatomaceous earth has sometimes been referred to as fiberglass, or having the same effects as fiberglass on those pests and on the insects' exoskeletons, right? So as they crawl along the diatomaceous earth that you've sprinkled on your plants, as they're trying to find a little place to dig in and lay their eggs, it will dry out their exoskeletons and pierce them slightly. So it's a great deterrent to sprinkle at the base of your squash plants. If you are direct seeding your squash in mid to late spring, then as soon as those squash plants sprout, I would apply a little bit of diatomaceous earth around each of your plants and on your plants. This can be a great preventative against the vine borer. And honestly, this is one of the most effective ways of preventing preventing the vine borer if you are planning to grow squash. So this is what I did last week. I saw some of the moths showing up already, and I went ahead and applied some diatomaceous earth. Now we are going to switch and talk about the tomato hornworm. This is one that I battle every year, consistently every year. My space is really prone to them. So this is an overwintered pest that affects a lot of your Solanaceae plants, mainly your tomatoes, but I have even seen tomato hornworms affecting my hot peppers, which I think is really bold, and they must be really desperate if these little caterpillars want to go munch on some spicy pepper plants, but I have seen it. It's kind of crazy. So a tomato hornworm, what does it look like? Well, it's a caterpillar. It's usually quite large. These can be alarming to encounter for the first time. They are bright green. They're actually the same color as your tomato plants. So they use their color as a disguise, as a camouflage. They can be really hard to track down. But the two ways that you know if you have tomato hornworms on your tomato plants, or the most obvious way to tell, is if you come out to your plants one day and you see that they almost look like the leaves look skeletonized. If the leaves look skeletonized from the top of the plant down, that is a great indication that you have a tomato hornworm. Yes, the little hornworm crawls up from the soil all the way to the tippy tops of your tomato plants and starts munching from the top down. Mainly what the tomato hornworm is after is the leaves of your plant. So that's the big thing that they're going to be eating. But they can also eat the green fruit of your tomatoes before they ripen. Another way that you can identify if you have a tomato hornworm issue is to look for their frass. Now, frass, if you will, insect frass, if you will, is a very polite, very PC way of referring to insect poop. So you can look for the tomato hornworm frass or poop on your tomato plants as well. These are really interesting looking frass droppings. They kind of look like little grenades. And they're usually like a dark green to an olive green. It's usually like the size of your pinky fingernail. Like I said, these hornworms, they can be big. Now, the good thing is that usually you can follow the frass up your plant to find the tomato hornworm. Follow the frass. If you see any like grenade-shaped droppings on your plants, look for the tomato hornworm. As I mentioned, the tomato hornworm is a large caterpillar. It's usually bright green, the same color as your tomato plants, and it has a bright red horn on its rear end. Yeah, that's where it gets the name tomato hornworm. Now, great ways of preventing and treating tomato hornworm issues are both the same ways of treating a squash bug. So you can skip planting tomatoes for a season, which I know is kind of blasphemous. So depending on what you like to grow at home. If you don't want to skip planting tomatoes for a season, then you can apply diatomaceous earth the same way you would for the vine borer. Just make sure that you avoid any of the flowers of your tomato plants. But if you put it on the stalks and the leaves and even around the soil at the base of the plant, that can help to prevent the tomato hornworm. Okay, so the fourth notorious bug of summer is perhaps, all of these are fairly notorious, but this is perhaps the most dreaded pest of the summer season. It's the Japanese beetle. Now, the Japanese beetle is the adult form, or is the adult of this particular animal, and its larvae or its grubs will overwinter in the soil. So the same process as the squash bug, the tomato hornworm, those the younger life phases overwinter in the soil. And you actually, like sometimes when you're planting your spring and early summer vegetables, you can see the grubs of the Japanese beetle in the soil. Now, Japanese beetle grubs, they are like quintessential grub. I mean, this is like Timon and Pumbaa type grub looking thing that you can spot in your soil. They are a creamy white color, almost translucent even. They usually have a hint of like bluish gray to them, and they have a rust colored head. So if you're digging around in the soil in the early spring, early summer, and you see grubs like this, chances are you will have a Japanese beetle population emerge in early summer, late spring, early summer. Now, Japanese beetles, their favorite plants to munch on are members of the Rosaceae plant family. So if you're interested in getting a little refresh on the Rosaceae plant family, I will put a suggestion for that podcast episode that I did earlier this spring, as well as some others like on the Cucurbitaceae plant family and the Solanaceae plant family in today's show notes for you to go back and listen to if you're interested. Members of the Rosaceae plant family include roses, of course, as well as strawberries, raspberries, grapes, cherry trees. These are all beloved snacks. Summery snacks for the adult Japanese beetle. So if you're growing any of these in particular, keep your eyes peeled for that beetle. Now, usually the adults will do something similar as the hornworm, and they will skeletonize the leaves. So they're really after the leaves. A lot of people, when they see Japanese beetles, they are concerned that the beetle is going to kill their plant. Now, the Japanese beetle, and in fact, most of these notorious bugs of summer do not kill your plants outright. I mean, the exception here, of course, is the vine borer. Like, that's fairly detrimental. Most of these other pests that we're talking about today do not actually kill the plant in question. So if you find them on perennial plants, they're not going to kill the plant. So like, for example, my grapevines that I have, I think this is the third year I've had these grapevines, and the last 2 years I had fairly drastic Japanese beetle infestations. In the grapes, they continue to come back year after year. I haven't lost any plants, but ask me how many grapes I have harvested from my plants. Now, being that they are a perennial fruit producing plants, I can expect it to take a couple of years for them to produce a full harvest. So I'm hopeful that this year I will get to harvest some grapes. But the real damage or the real detriment to having Japanese beetles on your plants is that they eat the leaves, which of course are important for taking in energy, for sugar production, and for creating large clusters of fruit. So while they are not detrimental to the overall health and viability of your plant, they can most certainly impact your harvest, your yields, which is why you're growing the plant, right? For the grapes. Japanese beetles, of course, for those of you who are fortunate enough to have never seen a Japanese beetle. Japanese beetles are small-ish beetles. They're usually about the size of your thumbnail, and they are primarily like a bronze color, but they're very iridescent. So they're a really unique beetle. They're kind of colorful, and they have a hard outer shell, a hard exoskeleton. And sometimes people get these confused with June bugs, but while they may, I can definitely see the resemblance between the two bugs, but they are very different. June bugs are much larger beetles, and in my experience, they tend to be less detrimental than Japanese beetles, and there's usually fewer of them. A great way to work to control these populations is to apply a product called Milky Spore. It's safe for organic growing, and it's a bacteria that you can introduce into your soil. So this is a Bacillus thuringiensis strain. I think Milky Spore is Bacillus thuringiensis idealis or something like that. Basically, this kind of product, as well as BT, which is just Bacillus thuringiensis, are biospecific insecticides. So they only treat for specific insects, specific grubs, larval stages of these insects, and it's a bacteria. And the bacteria can exist without affecting any other bugs. It can be a really beneficial product to use. It's best to apply your milky spore in the fall after everything has gone down into the ground and is overwintering. That's a great time to apply milky spore to your entire yard. So I say all of this with an asterisk because chances are, if you have a significant Japanese beetle infestation one year, then most likely your neighbors next to you also have a significant Japanese beetle infestation. You can treat your yard with milky spore and be super successful in limiting the populations that emerge from your yard in the following season. But if your neighbor or someone even a few streets down from you doesn't happen to treat their yard with milky spore and their Japanese beetles emerge and find their way to your house next year, it's really, really hard sometimes with bugs to feel like you can totally get a grasp on them, which is why I think with pest management, it really comes down to finding a happy coexistence or perhaps a willing coexistence. So you can try the milky spore. You can also use diatomaceous earth on your plants to help keep the Japanese beetles away. There are plenty of people who like to use the Japanese beetle traps, but as it's a trap, it does encourage or draw in beetles in order to capture them. So if you do use a trap, keep it far away from your plants that you know that they like. A fun little thing for you to play around with, experiment if you would like, is planting geraniums. Geranium flowers have an essential oil in their petals, and this essential oil is lethal to the Japanese beetle. But the Japanese beetle is also attracted to it. So it's kind of like a natural Japanese beetle trap. They like the smell, they're drawn to it, and once they interact with the oil enough, it paralyzes them. I know. Fun little fact for you there about Japanese beetles. If you suspect that you're going to have an issue with Japanese beetles this year, you might consider planting some geraniums in and around your space as a deterrent. Japanese beetles, fourth notorious bug of summer. Finally, to wrap us up for today's episode with the notorious bugs of summer, we have the leaf-footed bug. This is also a true bug. This is usually an insect that I see showing up towards the end of summer, or at least like mid-summer, mid to late summer. It's also a shield bug, just like the squash bug. Unlike the tomato hornworm, unlike the Japanese beetle and the vine borer and the squash bug, who prefer mainly the stems, stalks, and leaves of your plants, the leaf-footed bug is a shield bug that enjoys eating the sugar from the fruits of your plants. So they'll usually stick something called a proboscis, which a lot of insects have, including honeybees. They have proboscises, but they will stick their little proboscis, which is a long appendage that comes out of their mouth, into your fruits to suck out the sweet, sugary goodness that they find inside. I find these later in the season on my tomatoes, my squash, my peppers, other large summer fruits. So just like the squash bug, they have large, elongated exoskeletons that look kind of like a shield. Right? And they have really long hind legs that have kind of like this flattened portion towards the bottom of their hind leg that looks like a leaf. So that's why they're called a leaf-footed bug. And to be totally honest with you, I have already seen some of these bugs out, which is a little concerning because typically And when I'm recording this, it's early June. Like we are just a few days into the month of June. And usually I don't see the leaf-footed bug until like late July, early August. So I usually see this emergence as a sign that the summer plants are on their way out. So it's a little concerning that I've already seen these out so early in the season. They do prefer more ripe fruits rather than like the early green fruits. So it could go either way. It could be actually beneficial that they're emerging now. They're realizing they don't have much to snack on, and then maybe their populations will die back early in the season. That way we don't have to worry about them as much towards the end of summer, but it's kind of hard to tell. Leaf-footed bugs can be repelled the same way as a lot of these other bugs using diatomaceous earth and other organic pesticides on your plants. So just a few like top best practices before we close out for managing and controlling bugs in your space. If you want to learn more about these best practices, I have more notes included in that big book of bugs, the Patio Farmer's Big Book of Bugs, which I will link in today's show notes. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, this digital download is only $14, and I think it would be really helpful for you to have on hand throughout the summer. So just throwing that out, and really all year round, because it has year-round bugs, good bugs, bad bugs, all the bugs. Okay, so some best practices for controlling and managing bug populations. The first thing that you'll want to do is make sure you're looking at your plants daily. You're scouting your plants, you're looking at them from all angles. You want to make sure that you can spot a bug before it becomes a significant issue. Giving your plants the right amount of space that they need to grow is another great way to mitigate pest issues. Most of these insects, as we have learned, overwinter and come up from the soil. So as they emerge, if you have plants planted really closely together, that's a great hiding spot and great food source for them as soon as they emerge. The more access to direct sunlight your plants have, and the more airflow that you have all around your plants, and especially right at the base, is super helpful for deterring bugs from feeling nice and cozy and hidden and at home in your plants, in and around your plants. Next best practice is as soon as you see the bug, and this takes some getting used to, but as soon as you see the bug, pick the bug off your plant and try to kill it. But if you see some of these bugs, you want to pick them off as soon as you see them and kill them. I know, it sounds so vicious. It really does. But like I said, we're striking for happy coexistence with our plants and within our ecosystem. So that really is the safest way and the most effective way of treating for insects in your space. When you see them, pick them, squish them. Find your rhythm, find your technique. For me, sometimes I just pick them and then immediately throw them on the ground and step on them. Oh, so harsh. I know. Or if I'm lucky, I get to feed them to my chickens. Talk about nature feeding nature. Embrace manual removal. Make sure you have supplies on hand to treat for the bugs when you see them. I mentioned two things in particular in this week's episode. One is diatomaceous earth and another one is milky spore. But there's plenty of other things that you can have ready to go in case of a pest issue that you might want to treat for. And I have a whole list of those tucked into the Patio Farmer's Big Book of Bugs. So just another plug for that. If you define a pest issue that you've experienced this year as an infestation, then you want to be sure that you haul off the plants that were affected. You don't want to leave them in your space. You don't want to leave them lying around. You don't want to compost them. You want to bag them up and have them totally removed from your space. Again, just thinking about the overwintering nature of a lot of these pests. And then finally, be friendly. Maybe BEE friendly. Plant companion plants. I mentioned the geraniums with the Japanese beetles, but you can also plant things like nasturtiums and marigolds and lavender and borage and basil and oregano and thyme that flower that can attract beneficial bugs that will eat the bad bugs, or just their scent or having them around, maybe their texture even, like with borage, can help to keep the bad bugs away. So be friendly, plant some companion plants for keeping pests at bay in your space. So that was just a quick introduction to the notorious bugs of summer. I hope this was helpful. I hope this wasn't too heavy. That's always the balance that I'm trying to strike when I'm talking about pests and disease in your space, is not being too heavy and too pessimistic, but also just sharing this information so that you are better equipped to handle whatever comes your way. And pests and disease, like I mentioned, are normal, expected members of plant ecosystems. And it really is about striking that balance with happy coexistence. So there you go. The notorious bugs of summer. And if you're interested in getting the Patio Farmer's big book of bugs to walk you through with pictures, the bad bugs, some of which I mentioned today, but there's plenty more tucked into this resource. The bad bugs, the good bugs, and some tips for keeping those pest populations manageable, then be sure to look for that link. Next week's episode, I am going to share, kind of along the lines of the notorious bugs of summer, I'm going to share some best practices for growing healthy summer vegetables. Be sure to tune in. New episodes are shared every Tuesday. And if you have listened to this podcast in the past, then you know that I like to sign off with a fun little fact, fun little tidbit morsel of information at the end of every episode. And today, given that it is the first week in June when I'm recording this, I would like to wish you all a happy pollinator month. Yes, June in the US, June is National Pollinator Month. So find a way to celebrate your pollinators. Maybe you plant some flowers. Oh, that's a fun little plug for Plant Club. So my monthly subscription service and also the sponsor for this podcast is Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. And this month in June, we are growing, if you join at the grow level, we are going to be growing edible flowers together. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And how perfect is that for Pollinator Month? But we're going to grow nasturtiums, marigolds. Surprise, you can totally eat marigolds. We're growing nasturtiums, marigolds, and bachelor button, which are some of my all-time favorite edible flowers. And the grow kit this month also includes some really interesting tools and components, including chili flakes, interesting, wind chimes, ring-a-ding-ding, and a book. I love books. I'm obsessed with books, you guys. And this book is all about edible flowers, growing them, adding them to our space, designing our space with them, and also includes recipes for eating and enjoying edible flowers. If you are interested in joining Plant Club, a great celebration for June being Pollinator Month, be sure to check the show notes today, and there will be information there for how to sign up. Thanks for tuning in, you guys, and that's all I've got for this week. I will see you again next week for those best practices on maintaining healthy summer veggies. I'll see you then. Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Growing Space Podcast. I hope that you learned something new and that you were able to take this new information home with you and implement into your growing journey and into your growing space. As always, I am here to support you in your food growing journey. If you'd like to learn more about the different services and resources and membership programs that I run through the Patio Farmer, please check out my website, thepatiofarmer.com. You can also follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and oh my gosh, most recently, TikTok. Wow. I know. Here I am. Patio Farmer is on TikTok. It's very exciting. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like or a rating or a review if you want. Maybe share a little comment about your favorite part of the episode. Share it with a friend. The more interactions I get with my little podcast online, the more I'm able to help people just like you in their food growing journeys. As always, thanks for being here, and I will see you again next week.